In The Sopranos, New Jersey mafia boss Tony Soprano must endure trials and tribulations in the form of volatile gangsters, such as his insubordinate nephew Christopher, the unhinged Ralph Cifaretto, and of course, Phil Leotardo. Uncle Philly, portrayed in the show by Reza Pahlavi, is something of the final boss of the show. Tony has faced many adversaries during his tenure and boss, many of whom came out of the can, like Richie Aprile and Tony's cousin, that animal Blondetto. Each time the problems get worse and more severe for Tony. Phil has all of the abrasive qualities his predecessors had, but amplified. He's insecure, he's violent, he's petty, he even possesses supernatural abilities like being able to turn into a house. As we've spoken about in previous videos, Phil is a manifestation of old school La Cosa Nostra, the old days. But as Tony begins to learn through his therapy sessions with Dr. Milfy, his Remember When trip with Paulie, and his interactions with people he used to look up to in his youth, who he now sees as a nuisance, like Richie. Thing about the old days, they the old days, and Phil Leotardo is an exhibition of Tony's resentment of said old days, when initially in the show, he felt he came in at the end, the best is over, as he said in the very first episode. Phil comes out of the can after 20 years not a peep and slips back into a role as an enforcer for Johnny Sack. And after his brother is mauled to death by an animal, his resentment of that pygmy thing in Jersey increases, but he holds it together for John's sake when Johnny ends up going to prison and Phil takes over as acting boss. It's the Vito situation, whatever happened there, that really sends Phil irate, in what is one of the most shocking betrayals of the show, I mean to Paulie especially, now that he's accepted it. Vito Spadafori, big construction tycoon, is outed as a chap-swearing ass muncher. Phil is most out for Vito's head after the parade float is caught giving head, but when Phil heads over to Jersey, he is furious with Tony's laissez-faire attitude to the whole thing, leading Phil to take matters into his own hands, track down Vito, and eventually take him out at the motel he's living in. Vito waddles into his room before he's ambushed by Phil's goons and the man himself comes out of the closet. Who knows how long he stayed in there to make this effective metaphor, but I'm sure a couple of hours growing mushrooms out of his ass is nothing to a man who did 20 fucking years. And the goons proceed to gag and beat Vito to death, shoving a pool cue up his fat ass for symbolic finesse. This must have been Vito's therapy that Chris was telling Finn about. Before the scene ends, the camera makes a point to show Uncle Philly grabbing the bedsheets and grimacing as he watches the action unfold. It's one of the more minor mysteries of The Sopranos, and I thought we might discuss it today. Why did Phil grab the bedsheets as Vito was beaten to death? Now, you can't talk about this scene without bringing up the suggestion that Phil himself may have been playing for the pink team. I don't want to talk too much about this here, because it takes away from the discussion about the bedsheet thing, and Phil being gay is something we've discussed on the channel. In fact, we've got a few videos on Phil, so check them out when you're done with this one and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. But the lone gayman theory is one that was endorsed by Sopranos creator David Chase on the Talking Sopranos podcast, where he said that Phil probably had internal feelings that he didn't recognize and lashed out through his insecurity as a result. Personally, I don't subscribe. There's a man's reputation at stake, and I don't like that kind of theory. It upsets me. As I mentioned in my video, Why You're Wrong About Phil Leotardo, I think there are deep-rooted insecurities in Phil, but to label him as a self-loathing gay person does take away from the nuances of his character, with most of the insecurities embedded into the character, relating to the fact that he wasted 20 years of his life for a cause that does not actually exist. It's something nobody else believes in anymore. I think it's reductionist to say that he's a fag and just leave it at that. It doesn't do justice to the genius writing of the show. But in any case, it is a valid theory and it does have a lot of muscle to it. And bringing it back to the bedsheets, many Sopranos fans feel that it's a sign that Phil was getting turned on because he's gay. But this has never made sense to me. Sure, there are numerous clues in the show that point to Phil batting for the other side, but you can't point to this action as an indication. Why would Phil be creaming for Vito here? It's not as if Vito is stripping and his irresistible Rubenesque body is what's giving Phil the Manson lamps. The man is getting beaten to death. There's nothing sexy about it. If he was getting turned on here, that would suggest he's some kind of sadist, not an ass muncher. I mean, do you think he's getting a baguette in his pants the size of Ginny Sack's mole, watching Fat Dom desperately trying to find Vito's asshole under layers and layers of fat so he can shove a pool cue up there? That would make Phil so hot down there? I don't buy it. The only way it makes sense is if you go further with the sadism suggestion, as we'll explore later in this video. My initial interpretation of the scene when I first watched it, and this is still my general thought on it, is that the sheer viciousness that was being done to Vito was having an effect on even Phil, making even a man who's as hard as him, if you'll pardon the pun, wince with pain. I never really thought about it past that. For me, it was to emphasize how bad what was happening to Vito was, how painful the beating was, which was made all the more powerful by not actually showing it and instead showing us the reaction of it from a man who is otherwise usually stoic and the man who ordered the hit in the first place. In fact, Phil is accustomed to murder. One could argue he has the time of his life with it. Look at the Lorraine Caluso fake out hit. He would have tested out the gun and the book, worked on his entrance, his exit line. He loves this stuff. But this hit is different because it's not a quick shot to the head. It's a visceral beatdown. He hated the guy, hunted him down for weeks, but perhaps in that moment he knew that he was having his cousin's husband brutally murdered, a man he knew for years and was actually pretty close to before. Is it possible to interpret the gripping of the bedsheet as a quiet, almost private moment that we're not supposed to be privy to, like when Phil cried like a woman at the hospital? A human moment, a glimpse into a side of Phil that he doesn't present to the world, and it came out a little during the beatdown. Even when Phil is with his wife, he tends to be quiet when she's harping on, and he doesn't let on what he's thinking. Remember him staring awake at night? Or leaving to try and take a wicked shit when the malignant cunt is going on and on? Phil would honestly be one of the best characters to do therapy with Melfi. It would be fascinating to hear him verbalize what's deep in his head. Frankly, he looks depressed and ashamed watching Vito's death. Is it too much of a stretch to suggest there was a hint of regret at what he was doing, but in his warped sense of honor he felt he had to go through with it? Some even go further and suggest there was something going on with Phil and Vito, which is why Phil was in pain during the beatdown. And after Vito got initially outed, Phil thought he'd be next, so he knew that he's gotta go. Always with the scenarios, Sopranos fans. He's a married man with a gumar. If Phil did love Vito, then he loved him like a brother-in-law. I really doubt there was a lover's quarrel going on there. The only way I think you would link the whole Phil being gay thing with this Vito situation is that Phil was self-loathing because he compromised in the can and that he was taking it out on Vito here, hence the contorted facial expression and gripping the bedsheets. Now going back to the sadism, that was my next comment. I won't necessarily deny that Phil could have been experiencing some kind of paraphilic pleasure. After a semester and a half eating grilled cheese off the radiator, he would have seen some shit. I don't think it's too brazen to suggest Phil experienced some kind of sexual violence in the can. Perhaps this very situation was something he had done, something he used to do to people in the can. Some of his dialogue, like Ruchi April before him, who for example told Chrissy he's got a hard-on for him, is loaded with sexual violence, like when he threatens to put a Discman up Chrissy's mother's box, or when he tells Tony to stick his sorries in his ass. Agent Harris also says that he tried to set up a female officer for rape. Maybe he's got something going on up there, and if sexual violence was something he used in the can as a method of domination, then maybe he did get off of what he was doing to Vito after developing a sadistic reaction, an unseemly taste for such things. Let's not forget, he was going to perform animal cruelty on Blundetto. He clearly has a cruel streak and has a thing about torture and violence. It's also possible he gets off on the revenge aspect, seeing himself as the righteous crusader who has righted the wrong that Vito has caused. Vito's gayness was a personal offence, and now he had restored dignity to his family name. His annoying wife would also be off his back. His chance to do it to Blundetto was robbed from him, but here he's successful. It's one of Phil's few victories on the show. Vito betrayed him and his cousin. His brother got killed and he couldn't take revenge. He was in the can while everybody else was enjoying themselves. Nobody cares about the rules he sacrificed 20 years of his life for. His family was named after a ballet dancer. His boss cried at a wedding. Phil's sense of pride and honour has been hammered harder than Vito's ass cheeks when Johnny Cakes showed him a good time. This was a case of a cruel and brutal man getting a rare victory. On a metatextual level, it's interesting to note, if this is true, that Vito gets off on something taboo, men dressed like the village people, and Phil also gets off on something taboo, murdering cornholing cocksuckers. So why do you think Phil Leotardo grabbed the bedsheets while Vito was beaten? Maybe he was going down memory lane reminiscing when he did the same to Joe Pesci in Casino. Maybe when they ripped off Vito's pants, Vito sprayed a little dysentery amongst Phil's ranks and it disgusted him. Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel, become a channel member for early and exclusive video access, and thanks for watching.